to do our session slightly differently in that we've got two families. We're focusing on the one family. If we've got time at the end, if there's still some time, we'll show some video of the second family. But we kind of wanted to replicate how we're undertaking supervision in Kent. And then we've got an extra supervision there, which is the wider pod team. So to start off, we're going to hand over to Stuart just to set the context for this meeting.
Okay, just to keep it brief to introduce the family, we have a genogram here. I've circled the members that are going to be present in the video. Because as you see from the video, you can only see the client Emma. You probably see Nan coming in and out of the backgrounds. And I suppose where me and James are looking at the moment is Emma's sister Billy Jo and her nephew Shay, who's only 3. Where the camera is placed, you'll probably hear Shay more than most people. I suppose just to give a little bit of context, that we started to see this family, I think it was, well, they referred to us in October last year, and it was Emma's first presentation. So this is all they've known of mental health services, Kids for Open Dialogue. And around that time, they were possibly looking at admission, but the family wanted to actually be involved and for Emma to stay at home. So we were invited in at that stage. Mindful being a real family, it's probably unlikely, but if you do recognise the family, to let us know, because obviously we don't want to be showing something about people you may know outside of services. And I think that probably sets it up nicely. Yeah, oh, sorry, yeah, just to say, this is probably about session 20, so to give an idea of where this fits in, of how often we've seen the family. It started out weekly, and as over time has sort of become 2 weekly and sort of here and there, but gone back to weekly recently. So around about 20, there's a session 20, but it might be a bit further down the line. Okay.
So we're just going to show the 5-minute section on the start of the session.
I've been feeling a bit down the past few days. I don't know why.
Who are in the session, but we've also got Catherine and Emma because they're part of the team who've been going into the home over the last year. So when we reflect back in Kent, we always try and have the whole team, even if they're not in the session. So, and what we're going to try and do is maybe go through half of the fidelity criteria on this intro, and then the other half of the fidelity criteria when we show our next clip. Yeah?
Should we start at the beginning? Questions and...
It's not on enough. I know, not much.
It's on now. Okay, we're looking at questions and other open-ended questions. So how do we think we started that session?
So I think it's try it now.
Thank you.
Tap it, is it? Yeah, it's working.
It's a well, yeah. It's a well.
Right, okay. Second attempt, okay. Start of the session. So, how would we think that one?
I think James started with an open question, but I'm not sure. I think, as we've said on other feedbacks, whether we paused at that and actually went to each person, actually, what did each person want to use the session for?
Yeah, you're right. I think my sense was that if we'd have done that, we might have brought Anna in earlier. So she was in and out. We brought her in later on, but if we'd have got a sense of what Billy Jo wanted to get out of the session, and Emma and Anna.
I think there was context there though, that Anna had told us that she wasn't going to be part of the session, it was just going to be the 2 sisters. that were going to be in the session, but then later Anna's kind of drawn in and actually joins. But actually we focused, because Emma started talking, but we didn't pause and say, oh, what would Billy Joe want to get from the session? Is there any other comments about how we opened?
No, I think that's something we struggled with generally in the sessions, which is what reflected from. I think that's something we struggled with in sessions, isn't it? About educating everybody involved, asking everybody.
Because I think part that we get into a routine. The expectation is that it's an open session, so when you want to start, and then we just fly up.
And part of that routine is that we discuss Emma's current mental state, what the family do, and so it's a note to self, I think, certainly for me. Next bit, responsive listening, use the words of the client, show achievement. I guess we both touched on just using their 2 or 3 words. Emma uses that relatively well, I think. She uses the invitation to speak.
Yeah, I was just going to agree that in the bit we saw, repeating her last few words and kind of leaning forward a bit seemed to be the invitation for her to say more about what she was speaking about. And this is fairly typical of her in that she starts with a kind of a biological description of her symptoms, and there's always an associated lot of anxiety, which isn't always you can't necessarily see it, but when you're in the room with her you feel it, and I could see that you just leaned in a little bit, which we could probably do more of, was what I was thinking, having watched that. That we could do more of what Mark was encouraging earlier, around leaning in and, attentive listening, because she responded to that little bit of the
It's actually quite interesting, sort of obviously having worked with the family, that actually Emma doesn't respond well to questions. Before, if we've kind of gone down that route of not probing, but asking questions to kind of tease out more information, actually that hasn't seemed to help. Whereas actually just repeating the utterances has seemed to. Should we say about tolerating silences? I suppose we didn't really see.
I was going to say the same thing, which is that we didn't have silence there, and this is a family who talk all the time. If no sooner is there an age, then somebody's going to be saying something. So we haven't had much opportunity to use silences in the discourses, and that was fairly typical. I think they would find silence very anxiety-provoking.
I was going to echo that. I guess this is for people who don't know. This is a 5-minute section of a 2-hour session. So in that time, I don't think there were any silences that we were needed to tolerate.
Because I suppose part of the family script is actually this is as quiet as the family ever are, and the least chaotic they are. Usually it's they explain it sort of like a train station, yeah. There's people coming and going, yeah. Emphasising the present moment, responding to immediate reactions. I always find this one quite difficult to think about, and to actually what was it that maybe would relate to this criteria.
I was thinking that in that segment we saw Billy Joe was giving the most immediate reactions, which is how I've experienced her as well. She has got a view and an opinion, and she does express it. And she's also tends to be on that kind of high plateau. Her emotional state is always a bit up, and she's managing the child at the same time as she's talking. I wonder if we could respond better to her, especially in those times when we have the 2 sisters alone, which I would say that was Emma's choice based on the conversations I've had with them, Emma probably chose to just have Billy Joe. So there was something about Emma wanting to do something with that relationship that maybe, with Billy Joe speaking so much, maybe there was something extra we could have done, you know, of the options that we've talked about before.
I think what we didn't do was go back into the past before psychosis bit. So in some sense, I thought we sort of stuck with where we're at the moment. Shall we listen to our team?
Any comments from the wider reflecting team on the key elements?
I suppose I was just wondering, we're seeing the figure going in and out in the background, whether there was any engagement. Is it the mother or the nan? I'm not too sure. It's nan. Whether there'd been any, whether she participated in any of the sessions at any time, or what the kind of input was from other members of the family.
When I was watching the film, I saw one point where her gaze was directly onto Stuart and James, because they were talking about her involvement, and she stopped for a moment and she was engaged before she went off into the kitchen. Yeah. Yeah. And that said to me, and going back to what Jacques said, that, you know, that eye contact was really important. So although she wasn't saying anything, there was an engagement process that was taking place, and acknowledged by, you know, returning the eye gaze.
I've seen this before, but what struck me is that you can't change furniture, but somehow the way Emma's sitting is, there's something about body language and the communication which is difficult with the way. So I was wondering whether that was a choice to take that seat and to be on and off herself, or what it meant. So.
I wasn't sure whether we're going over fidelity, just commenting about what we've heard. What I noticed was the achievement, and I saw a lot about Stuart just leaning forward and nodding quite a lot, and actually also when James was exactly leaning forward, there was this sense that he was really attentive to what was being said. And also I noticed his glances across the family, even when Billy was talking, there was still, you know, glances and some kind of acknowledgement about everybody else in the room. That was really good.
I just wanted to say, although I know it's just 5 minutes of the clip, there was more of interviewing rather than, you know, dialogue between the family members, because I saw it was you two guys interviewing. First of all, it was Emma, then second time it was Billy Joe. I didn't see much of dialogue between Billy Joe and Emma.
I experienced that a little bit different, and then they asked Emma, well, both of them, how they wanted to use the session, and then Emma started talking, and Emma carried on talking, and then it reached a point where I thought James very skillfully invited Billy Joe into that conversation. And then, I mean, we can't see them, but Emma is sitting as if she's looking more at Billy Joe than she is Stuart and James. And I mean, I don't know, because we can't see Billy, but I almost imagined her looking back and her talking. I could be totally wrong, but just because of how intently Emma looks towards Billy, I get the sense that there's some communication going on there.
I agree with Hannah as well. The environment in which they're in, the comings and goings, the dog, whining and going on in the background, the nan in and out of the kitchen. So I think, and obviously we can't quite see the shape of the room, what it's like this end. So I think that's difficult to manage. But what I liked is the repeating of the utterances, the and just giving those sort of few tail end words of those utterances.
There's a couple of things. One, I think at the beginning of the session about creating the context for understanding what's out in the field somehow. So just step by step, inviting people's thoughts and requests. So developing the context before taking off any direction. But the thing that really strikes me, and that's at the beginning, a bit like you're saying, Sonia, is the busyness of, I'll keep looking at this little train track here, and I can hear Shay, I can hear this dog yapping through the background there. I'm really interested in Nan, who's been coming and going. She's ignored the dog's feeding time there, because she seems very interested in this conversation, partaking in that. But what strikes me is how still James and my good man is here. In terms of, I was thinking about resonance or embodiment, and kind of curious that you're so still in such a busy environment.
I had a question about the medical jargon that was used by Emma, and if she had only open dialogue, how did the depression, psychosis, how did they creep into the? So I was curious as to where this was coming from.
Okay, what we'd like to do now is open it up to the wider pod team for views and reflections.
Yeah, I noticed the busyness as well, and it was kind of quite nice to see. And I think, like this would be really good for future trainings to actually see the dogs barking, the children running around, someone coming in and out, because that's something that I certainly hadn't experienced watching videos and doing all these role plays, as fantastic as they are. It doesn't really set you up for how it really is. So that was really nice to see. One thing I noticed, it might be just because I'm not sure she was, but it looked like at one point Emma might have been crying because she sort of, I don't know if she was or not, but she kind of wiped her face, and I just thought, oh no, is she crying? Because no one noticed that. She might have just been sort of like scratching her eyes or whatever. But yeah, so I just wondered if she actually was, or if it was just a random movement. Because no one seemed to pick up on that.
She was tired.
Oh, okay, yeah.
In fact, it's actually quite difficult to get her to be emotionally responsive. And it's interesting what was said about the stillness, because she's quite still. Whereas Billy Joe will be sitting on that sofa that you can't see, and she'll be gyrating practically with Shay on her lap, Yeah. And that's very quiet in this house. I mean, it is. Anybody could appear in the door, down the stairs, out of the bathroom at any time. But they're all family members. So, if you only have to go once in a Met Ball, but not for the whole 2 hours.
And in this session, there's 2 naked people arrived in the session.
Well, one naked person, one semi.
That completely put me off. After this session.
You haven't seen it yet?
I was curious about where you're sitting, the two of you. And it's an issue, I know in the video yesterday, the 3 of us were in a sort of row. And it is something that's come up for me, is being able to see each other. And so I was wondering about what that's like for you, both sitting. Because sometimes you're sort of placed there by the family, aren't you? And the impact that has. My other thought was, there's other really important family members, aren't there? There's mum, dad, and another brother. And I was curious about boyfriend, yeah, about their voices.
All of whom we've enjoyed meeting, Val. Pardon? All of whom we've enjoyed meeting, all members.
I think I just wanted to echo Hannah's comment about the words that Emma's using to describe what's going on for her, and how if this really, if open dialogue has been the main
I mean, that's not a fidelity question, but the bottom line is that she was seen by the crisis team initially, and she was commenced on medication by the crisis team. So, and the family have a very biological model themselves.
A lot of research.
Mum talks a lot about medication and about her own experience with medication and is pro-medication. So that's actually an interesting thing because they're an exception to a lot of the conversations we've had, which is that mum is pro-medication, and in session when I said looking forward to medication-free future, they were both slightly silent. That was quite a silencing thing to say, as it turned out. Sorry.
I was going to say, Mum's a great researcher as well, so actually has gone away and tried to come up with maybe answers or to understand what's happened. And I think for me that's how psychosis was really introduced, was the explanation of what's happened to Emma, for me.
Yeah, I was just wondering about all the other people and whether you go on in the session, if those people are not there, whether you kind of tend to ask what they might be saying or thinking.
I was really struck by being able to sit with the uncertainty and you being invited into those what can we do conversations, and yet you were kind of managing to just sit with that uncertainty and not be invited down there. So I was impressed, and I've kind of been in similar situations where you have to kind of tolerate that really. And also the polyphony, you know, the way you were getting that very important dialogue seemed to me about how people are with Emma and the different ways that they approach her. I mean, there was a lot of polyphony that was sort of emerging in that conversation, and it looked like it was going to go on and be a much wider conversation about how people sort of agree how she is, but they approach it in very different ways. So that to me was really a good example of polyphony.
I think Russell mild as well. No, he's not. Yeah.
Yeah. Russell, then Mark. Sorry, Mark, then Russell.
I'm just curious, if we take as a point of departure that what we're trying to do is build relationships as kind of an ideology, and then we take the research on a therapeutic relationship as being the core of so I'm wondering what kind of relationship you have with Emma, because we kind of exaggerated again in Norway, but the smiles that we said, you know, after you've met someone, they're a friend. So where's this warmth, friendship? I love you. You're a wonderful person. How are you doing? Do you trust me? Do you appreciate who I am? And where is that effective bond and connectedness after session 20? And it is kind of a lighten up. Where's the smiles? Where's the?
I'm hoping the second video might.
Do the smiles come in the second video?
I'm hoping, yeah.
Okay.
But Emma's quite alexithymia, if I can use that word. She doesn't manifest a lot of emotion or bodily movement.
Well, no,
even across 2 hours.
we can't do anything about her.
No,
we can just do something about us.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting that you do tend to take up her stillness for some reason. I don't know why.
And we hope it would go the opposite way, that she would take up
Our reactivity.
helping with the emotional regulation, the expressiveness, the ability to.
But sorry for dragging this out, but the thing is that the other members of the family are so reactive. And her boyfriend is quite still. So, you know, he talks, but he doesn't do it with, you know, it's reasonably monotonous voice, like Emma's voice is reasonably monotonous. So there's something about that as an important thing. But I understand what you're saying about bringing more responsiveness, getting more emotional responsiveness going to see where that would take you. That's helpful. I think that's a thing we can really take back.
But if we take this is a task, wouldn't it be a burden on the patient from our side to make patient do this or do that?
Do this or do that.
If we have as one of our aims to make patient more expressive, more this or more that, whatever we think it is. wouldn't it be something that will burden our patient with?
Yes, if we try to make them do this or do that, we don't want to make them do this or do that. We want them to show a warmth and a compassion in our faces and in our bodies, and I think that to a certain extent was lacking here. There was a kind of a neutrality and an ambivalence, whereas again, if we realize that a lot of what goes on between people is based on trust and affection and the embodiment of love, then we should express that somehow so that they're aware that we do care. Yeah.
The sculpture coming here, I mean the sculpture coming this, is there something between the culture you're coming from and the culture in this picture?
Yeah.
Because that is as warm as, sorry to say that, as English American people.
Is there something about culture in that?
I mean, you come from an American background, and then with the Norwegian, you're saying that when they see people smile and say, but that, I think that to be part of this country.
Okay.
Can I just say, probably Dad would get on the floor and be playing in the train set with the kid if I could get down there.
No, you wouldn't.
Because
he was naked and that might be
that role would be taken, in my mind, someone would have already picked up on that, the family would be there playing with him.
Nan is very attentive. She's always moving around caring for somebody or the dogs.
It's a voice that we haven't
The
brought
great
through.
aunt who's the big tractor. Yeah, we do not her, yeah.
I think he's 4. And
He's young.
He's naked in every time we see him.
He was dressed at the time. He was very sharp.
But we haven't brought his voice in.
And this idea about this kind of love thing, Mark, I think I agree to some extent, but I also think, yeah, culturally it's different, and for different people it's different. And I think that some people can show great warmth and really taking people very seriously by being their quiet, serious selves. And I think that to sort of have this idea that we all need to be warm and kind of smiling and attuning, I just think it's so different for different people. I think we really have to pay heed of that in open dialogue, because it's about individuals making that connection. Jaakko Seikkula, I mean, he's one of the most serious people I've met. You know, and he comes to it with a very serious state of being, but actually it's completely warm. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess we have different impressions of Jaakko, but again, just taking this specific context, does she feel like she's being met? And again, I think it's the relationship thing. I mean, you guys were sitting there, so do you feel like you have this connection with her? I guess and if you do, then that's fine.
I was just the fact we were allowed in the house and we stayed within the house. The family, basically, if you're out, if you're not helpful within the family, we would be told. They would be very upfront and say, well, actually, no, your timing is done. You can leave. The fact that actually they've wanting us to come back each week, for me, is that warmth. The idea actually, there's something about you guys coming that is helpful within our family.
And I think the fact that the child is running around naked, and I know from a glimpse last night there's somebody else that's half naked, an adult, that they feel very comfortable in the presence of this family, of these people going in. So that's embodied, isn't it? That they feel that.
And already I feel like us being there is an imposition.
They may not be comfortable with it. They may be oblivious.
I think they're oblivious. I think Mark's point's really important for us to think about for this family. I don't know, I understand completely, you can't be what you're not. That's, you can't put something on because you think it might fit, but there's something that's coming through very strongly for me about the huge emotional reactions out of the other members of the family, and that we're echoing this stillness of Emma. And that might actually need to be explored and examined and thought about by us.
We're going to let Russell in.
Steve, right.
No sound. There's no sound.
No sound?
He's talking, but we can't hear
We're
him.
tolerating you.
Sorry, Russell, we can't hear you. Mark's on it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I was just trying to grab the mic with my hand, but it didn't work, so I tried to speak anyway. But I didn't see your expressions on the video too well, and I absolutely accept what you're saying in terms of them inviting you back regularly. That in itself is a demonstration of the affection that exists. I think very much a professional thing, so that you try to be a bit mask-like in front of them. And I think abandoning that is quite important, in order to be able to show something, and people glimpse at you and they look for that. They don't necessarily know they're looking for it, but they look for it when they're telling you about something very emotive and quite, a really tumultuous event in their life. They're looking at you, and then if you're able to be conscious of the fact that I need not to have that mask, I need to look like I feel right now, and that, without any words, conveys something really deep. I've always seen that. And then the other thing is in reflections, in actually reflecting their empathy and how it made you feel personally, and how it affected you in your body to hear that. These are all new things and not things we're used to doing, but that's how I feel that as a serious person, you can get across that affection and empathy.
Well said.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that, for me, it was really clear that you guys had built a relationship with the family, that they trusted you, that they wanted you there. That was really clear. For me, it was kind of that sense of there was still a sort of, you're the professionals, can you tell us what to do, that needed a bit of working on, which I think is what we're talking about here. And one of the things that I found helpful in sessions with me, and what happened in the session that I had with Jarko, was his self-disclosure of his bereavement in comparison to what he was feeling when I was talking. I was just wondering how much you guys had self-disclosed or talked about your own personal experiences in connection to what I was doing.
I'd like to think there has been an element of that, but I'm not sure to the degree that I would like to. For me, it always feels a little bit calculated, that there's that pause and there's that thinking of, is it good for me to say this now? So it's almost like the brakes go on, you have the embodied sort of response to this, it sparked something for me in my own life. But at the moment I don't feel confident enough sometimes to use that, and I think afterwards, it would be really good to put some words to that, but it's too late. You've missed that opportunity either to reflect back at the time or in a later reflection in the session.
I think in all fairness to James, I think he's trying to sit back for, I can't remember your name, Stuart, and it's sort of that making him a bit sort of stiff, James, really, because you're just trying to hold back and let him be seen, so you create a circle sort of idea. And then the other thing I wanted to ask was this idea of like preempting their emotions, for Emma. Should we be reflecting back that she's sort of flatter, and then when she does something, is that when we do the responding to the emotion rather than trying to generate it?
That's interesting.
I agree.
I noticed in some of the conversations, not in this clip, we've talked about her. We've tried to touch somehow on the impact of the family on Emma, and this went down, didn't go down well. This was a tough bit of conversation that arose, and the family felt criticised, so much so that they brought the great aunt in to give us a good beating up the next time. I mean, I'm exaggerating for the sake of making it funny, but that is actually what happened. That they felt that we had obviously criticised them, and the great aunt came round the next time to give us a good talking to about that's not the way it is. But they went to a lot of trouble in both those sessions to talk about how Emma is reactive and does, but I've never seen it. So they're saying she would, so there is something for us to do here.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to give the wrong impression. It's not about steering her emotions or preempting anything. It's having a relationship. If it's session number 20, I would think we've done what we can, so that there is some sense of when I see this person, there is a sincere, authentic sense of caring for her. I think a couple of times she does a real. And I mean, my impression if I was sitting there, I think would be that she's slightly anxiety filled. She's not doing, and then I would try to mirror that, to get them eye contact, when you can't see, I realize that this must be hard for you in some sense, and can I communicate that with my own eyes and my body, and the fact that, yes. So it's not smiling through everything or anything else, but again, this is a diploma in relationship skills, and I think that entire idea of how can we be better at building relationships, I think is worth using some time talking about.
Stuart, can we hold it in for our next clip, or do you want to?
I'll just, an observation really about Beth. I mean, I saw it a little bit, I saw it as hanging on every word her family was saying. And that in itself was quite animated. She was listening, she was able to tolerate listening, hearing quite difficult things. So I don't know whether there was that flatness in some way. And it's difficult because you can't interpret that, but I saw that as not so much emotional, but quite respectful in the fact that they could talk like that. So maybe it might be acknowledging that. But that's been hearing that. But I saw that quite different. I saw her as really listening and not blunted or whatever we'd use really. So just sort of seeing it differently, seeing her reactions when her family member was talking.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next section of film, which is, how far in is it, James?
Come again.
How far is it, the next section that you're going to show?
Around about an hour into the
Around
session.
about an hour in, and we're going to try and show primarily a reflective session, about an hour into the same session.
I was just about to erupt, so we'll just, there was a bit of shouting at that point.
From
Between...
doesn't matter.
When I was listening to that, guys, I was thinking just how far Emma had come, actually. This is a lady who expressed herself through physical symptoms, fibromyalgia, physical pain for 2-3 years prior to psychosis. This is a lady who had every consultant meeting with every physical health doctor in the land at great expense, only to, in the last 2 minutes of the clock, in the last 4 days prior to dipping into psychosis, meets a neurologist for the 5th time who says there may be something psychological in this. Bam, 4 days later she's full-blown psychosis. So I think she's finding her voice relatively well. I say that because I'm sort of proud of her.
I think the fact that she stayed in the reflection, we've had the reflection process with the family's been really, really hard at times. So I think at different points where we'd be left by ourselves, reflect amongst ourselves, the whole family had left. And Emma stayed in the room and kind of, was taking that on board itself.
It was more about, I was wondering where we are with the sheep. I'm a little bit anal. And whether we're talking about the reflecting process, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Too long. Both of us, in my sense, going on too much. And try as we might to bring this, punctuate the session earlier on, we never seem to manage it. It's always an hour and 10 minutes in. It's then another 40 minutes of a session. So I need some help with that really, because there is something about this is a family that talk constantly, and at what point do you break at what point do you go off model and break their dialogue in order to add my voice? But still, too long.
Because I suppose for me that fits with the idea of the outer polyphony, that actually the voice is, it's a family conversation that sometimes we're kind of just observers to. And actually, when do we step out that stance and actually impose something on the family and try and force our agenda?
I think it was, I think what I've learned from yesterday today is that the reflections are too long and that we're probably making, one point is enough and we might be making 2 or 3. And it was very clear watching that now with that in my head, because as soon as you've made your first point, Nan is up and asking Emma, does she want to drink, and has to get back into the caring. and she had been engaged, and we know how much she engages routinely. So big lesson, I think, on that. But I did think that you, as always, did a good job on creating the opportunity for the family to respond to what you have said. I think you did do that. Billy Joe and the mum always say it's very weird, but Emma never says that.
Looking at it, I think there was a degree of interpretation and trying to make sense of what was being said, and kind of putting that together in a different framework. So on reflection, I'm wondering how many of the sort of own words, or how much was that us trying to reframe what's being said and making our own sense of it. Although it's like the fact that actually I think we were fairly tentative that everything was, it seems, or in my mind, I think there was that tentative element which I liked.
I think you also picked up on a concern which you said about her depression. Kind of that was explored very tentatively as well when she started off the session, saying how she's really concerned about depression and those words with you.
Should we look at other elements? We got up to the present moment, didn't we? So Polyphony, spoke a little bit about everyone was engaged, and actually I think we had an easy job because I don't think we had to really draw people in, but actually naturally, we didn't hear much of Nan, but actually throughout the time, Nan naturally had a part to play and was able to join.
And I guess in the reflection, I tried to bring in my own inner polyphony of how my heart skipped when they started. I can't even remember now. My heart skipped when they started to talk. She started to talk because historically she hasn't spoken, has she? As a way to resolve things.
I thought that the reflection may have prompted Emma to make the disclosure about George having said to her that he was lucky to have her, which I know it's difficult for others, but we know from the family that men are well managed in this family is the construct. That's just the construct of the way the dynamic, and lots of problems between mum and dad over the years, and man management being key to bring him under control, if I can use those, because this is kind of the way it sounds when mum talks about it. So that's why the very strong reaction from Billy Joe about George couldn't possibly have said that to you. It's completely rejected straight away is exactly what I would have expected. But Emma would have known that. If I know that, Emma would have known that was what was going to happen, and therefore I think that the reflection did allow her to make a disclosure, to bring in another issue that was probably something she needed to talk about.
Yeah, I was thinking about what came up for me when listening to the reflection was that how you two spoke about the male's roles within the family, and just kind of as two men sitting in that house within that kind of environment, I just kind of imagined it must have felt quite difficult, and whether or not that would kind of inhibit some of the things that you might want to say or talk about within that family, with that in mind. It was just a thought.
Just to say, I couldn't help noticing the fact that as soon as Stuart and James started reflecting, Emma changed their sitting position, as if, I didn't know if it had a meaning or not, but she changed. That is the time when Nana came to her and maybe she was asking if she wanted something to drink, yeah.
I suppose I'd like to just carry on from what Paul was saying, and I think after your period of reflection, I think Billy came in and sort of said, it's 20 sessions, I'm surprised you've come back, you know where the door is. And we were worried about this today, and they made a key point of saying we were worried about this today. And I wondered, what was it you know, what was it about today, or who was coming today that made her comment about that?
I think I agree that the reflections prompted something, and although Emma turned away, when the family were asked if they had any reflections on what had been said, and the sister spoke, Emma was really engaged. It's the first time I've seen her smile, and she smiled and was really listening to her sister. So something, it feels like from the reflections and allowing them to feedback on it, something had resonated for the sister and for Emma. So something had come up. Something, it felt like something shifted.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to say something about that because I felt, although the sister kept saying how weird that was, you know, although that's the session number 20, but she's still seeing that as weird. But she also said what reflection is doing for Emma and for her, and that's for them to, you, outsiders in the nicest way, but you pick on that, and picking on the emotions on Emma and how she is, that was felt by the family. And I could see Emma relating to that. So there was some conflicting message, but part of it was the validation that the reflections have offered.
Also, I noticed that Nan was listening very intently to the reflection, and whereas previously we'd seen in the video she'd be nipping kind of in and out. I know she did go out partly through it, but she seemed to be more engaged in the session during the reflection immediately afterwards. So yeah, it's a way of opening up.
I was just interested, we talked about the, that you very sensitively introduced the male dimension in the room, but in doing so it seemed that you also introduced a power dimension, because there was a very strong response from the sister on the sofa to that, and then of course Emma's response, which was sort of led on from that, and it seemed to open up that discussion as well, I felt.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the video before and I was watching it again and I was thinking about what Mark said and what everyone said about expressions and gestures and the embodiment of the, what would it be, an expression of empathy, wouldn't it? And I think it's all very subtle and I think it's easy to miss. I'm going to assume that, from what you've said about medication, that Emma is, if they're pro-medication, that perhaps a lot of her being able to express herself is masked by that, but there is nonetheless expression there. She smiles, the way her gaze moves, her body language, and maybe without even realising it, you're picking up on that, and that's why it seems less expressive. I don't know.
Sorry, as we're talking, something's just really resonated for me when the reflection was when they fed back and you outsiders, but I also felt like you men as well, and it demarcated you from the women in the room, and so when I think about the polyphony of voices, you the outsiders are the practitioners and professionals, but also in terms of the voices in my mind, it was also you, the men, as well. So I think it was on for me, what resonated was a number of levels that they were hearing you from, not just as professional mental health workers, but also as men, and what men mean in that family, I think.
Just following on from that, then, Yasmin, I was watching the thing about the relational focus related to that, I think, and something that was said earlier on, if I understood it, was the idea about the family not always knowing how to approach Emma. They said, and I was wondering about, in that clipping, about whether the two men had a sense about how to approach Emma, because the conversation goes through Billy Joe, the Nan had a word, and it felt to me that somehow there was nothing directly addressed to Emma. She made it difficult, I guess, in the seating, which has been said previously, but Yeah, so it's a question about whether the men knew how to approach her, how to be direct with her, or show something direct to her.
I was just recognising that normally there's women in the Padlet as well. There's Emma, Catherine and Alison at various times, and if that conversation that day would have been different had one of the women been in it, not just been Stuart and James.
Extend to the wider group now for reflections.
I was just struck by, I don't know if you noticed it, but right at the end of your reflection, you did hold a silence yourselves. So there was some, I felt, some toleration of silence, because you were able to end and then take a breath and pause before you then went on to ask the family. So it's in there, I think. The other thing is, I was wondering, it was lovely to hear James talk about being proud of Emma, and I kind of wondered what Emma might say if she were to have heard that, really.
I was just thinking about how difficult it must be to kind of bring Emma's voice into it, and you kind of saying the emphasis, she's just so kind of unresponsive and still. And it was making me reflect on the video that Jaco and Mary showed of the client that they've been working with, and how he expressed his feelings not through words but through his actions, how he used to get up and walk out of the room, and maybe how Emma might be doing something similar through, I noticed very much when she kind of described in the beginning of the session very demarcated kind of periods between her depression, then the psychosis, and another period of depression. And she very much kind of embodied the psychosis and called it the psychosis, and wondering whether you could kind of bring a voice to the psychosis and kind of ask her what the psychosis might be saying, trying to say. But there's a key in there somewhere.
I'm good.
Some thoughts around hearing, mishearing, and hearing differently, and assuming that we're hearing the same thing. When Val wrote up on the board witness earlier and respecting otherness, I read witness. And I started a conversation with Julie about, in my head, witness, and she'd obviously read it properly, and it was witness. So that's just an example. So there was a little example there that came to mind as you were talking about hearing differently. One person believing they'd heard one thing and their assumptions running on from that, and others hearing something else and their assumptions running on from that. That was just a little thought.
Yeah, it was just something, I think something about what you said, Eddie, about her voice being heard. And at the end there was this moment, I just felt really sad. I don't know why, but there was this moment where she was kind of talking about, was it her boyfriend who said she didn't, you're lucky to have me? Yeah. And she sort of stated this really horrible comment, you know, that made her, I don't know, maybe that's my assumption, but it sounded very horrible. And the sister was kind of being quite defensive, and she just sat there and there was this kind of very playful, childish music on in the background, and there was something about this sort of infantilization or something, but maybe this is all my own interpretation, I don't know, it just struck me. I'd like to watch it maybe again sometime, but it seemed very sad to me, that moment of where was her voice.
And there's something there about being in the present moment. And what struck me when Emma did turn, that I think I would have been tempted to, in a reflection, to actually just say, oh, I noticed Emma turned. I wonder what that, you know, was about, really. It might have been she just felt really uncomfortable. We don't know. And also I'd been tempted to comment on Nan is Anna coming in and out, and just sort of saying, I noticed Anna keeps coming out, and I just think, what's that? Is there anything about that that's important for her? So just actually noticing, you know, sort of details, small details, and staying with those. I couldn't hear James's reflection. Unfortunately, I didn't really get what he was saying, but I got that Stuart was giving one or the other. I really like that, sort of giving options about what you thought you'd heard. So you're not actually saying this is what I heard, but there were some different views. And I think that's really helpful in reflections, that you actually give a choice. So.
I really don't have much to add. I think it was wonderful, but there was two things that kind of hit me, and one thing was the laughter. I mean, I'm preoccupied with emotions, but kind of in the space of a network meeting, we should either laugh together or cry together, or somehow we haven't. There's just such this sense of communality when we laugh together, when we're smiling, and something is shared and given joy. And I think that was, for me, that was a special moment to see you guys kind of laugh together. And then just what Kathy was saying about your comment at the end, James. It would be interesting to hear if you've actually said that to Emma ever. How proud you are of her from what she has accomplished, the victor, the survivor, how proud she should be of herself, and how do we communicate that in an open dialogue meeting? Because I'm sure that would mean a lot to her, to hear that from someone like you.
She really wants to hear it from a mother.
Yeah.
But that's an interpretation.
It would make it easier for Mom if she heard James saying it.
Yeah, maybe. We have talked about how well she's done. Maybe not quite that word proud.
Yeah, so well done is such a kind of a, but there was so much emotion I felt in what James was saying. There was this heartfelt, really pride in who she had become and what she had accomplished.
Can I step back a level and say thank you to the Kent team? I feel really inspired. I think to watch, you made it very clear at the beginning that you're giving us an example of how you do supervision, and I guess I've read about it on Frontier, but actually to see it in action, to see the level of your comfort with a method that produces such rich dialogue, to see everybody taking part, I'm blown away. Thank you very much.
I agree.
Any other questions? I don't know if we're due for... What's the time? 12:15.
Is Russell still with us?
I think Russell's still with us.
Are you waving, Russell?
No, I waved at him.
Do you need the microphone? Yes.
He was clapping.
Are you clapping? Oh, you were waving for the microphone. No.
Do you want us to do the part of the second family? A completely different setup.
What are you going to do? Is that going to be then linked to
whatever the group
contextual?
I mean, what options? If you have more to offer,
we can go for
yes,
more
please.
fidelity.
We can do with more of this, can't we?
Or we
could do a fishbowl, could we? Just
you want a 2 minutes stand up and shake hands?
Yeah, well, we have to stand up anyway. There's different teams.
Yeah.
That might be interesting.
Yeah, 5-minute break, cup of tea, cup of coffee.
I'll hand over for Paul for some context.
Do my best. This is second family we're going to show. You can see a very different video. And just to put it kind of into context really, it was about session 12, and originally when Pat first came into contact with services, this was back in February this year, he was acutely unwell, acutely distressed, had to have a 136, and he was in a PQ for 2 months to give some kind of indication of how distressed he was. During the video, you can obviously see Pat and Alistair, the dad. Helen and Anna usually come to the meetings, but Helen was working this one particular time. I don't think Anna had actually got out of bed that morning. She's a university student, so she sometimes would come in towards the end of the meetings. So yeah, I think that's about it really. Okay. Okay, so do we want to go through the fidelity of the model, or just general reflections? Or?
I put in a request that we actually think about the sort of graces at this point. We haven't quite had that discussion. The graces, the contextual issues that were, and you can link that to your sort of inner polyphony as well.
It's probably not reflected in this film, but there was an issue, there has been an issue, and it kind of resonates for me a lot of what is being a man and what is being an adult man, mature man, and relationship between father and son, and that was constantly being raised. What it is to be a man in their family, in their community, culturally for them, and that was a very strong theme that resonated through a lot of the sessions. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I think very much initial meetings focused on Pat's interpretation. He would describe how he felt about his father and his relationship with his father. So it was very much the kind of, let's say, the lens of gender, becoming a man, which seems to dominate quite a bit, really.
It's kind of it's related to that, but it's not kind of up there, because the issues for me is, when I was thinking about just the situation here, I was thinking this is a lively little tea party we've got going on here, and where this is in our relationship with them, and because one of the things that's going on in this particular thing, I think, we mentioned later on in reflection, is that there's an issue about growth and separation and pride and shame, father and son. That I think Pat the son isn't like this very, very dominating father. That's how it's expressed. And just watching Pat the son here lead this conversation is a massive change. A massive change. He was previously all over the place, unable to contain himself. So this is a wonderful situation. And watching this father sit back and watch his son lead this conversation that's become quite friendly, informal. So in my mind about are we friends or whoever, people visiting. But it's a renegotiation here.
And I think, again, it's not in this clip, but Dad was able to verbalise that he has relinquished some of the power he has, which has allowed his son to grow and stuff. So if you think about all the power issues, there were real, when we first became involved in this family, there were real power issues of Pat feeling completely dominated and enveloped by his father, and now he's found. But it took Pat to take some control, but it also took his father to relinquish some of the power. So if we hadn't worked with father as well, we wouldn't have been able to see the change in the dynamics in the relationship, and that's what was quite beautiful about that, I think.
Something else as well is about ability and class. I think one of the things Pat spoke about, I mean, a lot was him struggling to find his way as an artist, and about where he was going to go from that, and having, you know, the family history, or the family, immediate family background is one of success, really, and being quite affluent. And I know that Pat was what he would say, how he would compare himself to other friends that have had their illustrations in different publications, and so that was another part of it.
Yeah, I think gender as well, because an interesting remark was made on one of the meetings by the sister that when the father retired, because he was a family lawyer, he changed his image, full body tattoos, became involved in meditation, so he had a complete change, and there was a massive role reversal in the house that Helen began to go out to work full time, so he retired and she went out full time. So that had a huge impact on them. I think for her to even mention it, because she usually comes into the meetings, when she does come and sits on the kitchen worktop, and you know they're quite sort of laid back, as you can probably see. But Alistair used to be very masculine, I think, and it was stereotypically masculine in his approach to the meetings, that he would have a very clear agenda, it would be written down before we arrived, and he would approach it like that, and that had evolved over the period of the meetings, that it would be very much, what did Pat want to look at?
And what I need to share is I found some of the initial early meetings really difficult, because I found Alistair a dominant father, and I had my own inner voices of a dominant father, and how much that shut me down, and I struggled with relating to Alistair, and in my mind I was, and I know in my mind I was pathologising him, but I was able to think what's resonating in me, and what was resonating in me is the dominant father that I had in my life.
Also, the issue of spirituality was significant within this, because following Pat's first episode, how he describes it, it's not in those terms, his first breakdown, was following a week away at mindfulness retreat. It was no silent retreat, and he spoke about becoming enlightened. He spoke about being connected with everything. He spoke about, he described himself as, his metaphor to describe as, he was a bird on top of a roof that was able to see everything all around him, but was unable to explain or communicate anything that was going on for him. So it was very much in the early days talking with Pat and kind of trying to hear his voice so he could kind of develop a language to really sort of explain what had happened to him, his version of events, and you saw a kind of narrative develop within the family and with Pat, which was,
I just have one question. I know there's 6 cups on the table, there's 5 of you, and whether you were expecting somebody else or whether it symbolises somebody else, I wasn't quite sure.
This was the sort of the way they always, when we came to visit, this was how it was. You would come in and they would ask you whether you wanted tea or coffee. And we actually would debate over this, wouldn't we, whether it was appropriate or not. But it was something that seemed to be quite important to them, and I think Helen actually mentioned it, that it was actually very positive for them having people come to the house, having a cup of tea, like, you know, and so it was obviously something very hospitable to them, that if you came to their house, you accepted their hospitality. The extra cup was because you made one too many, so we put it in the middle of the table, so that whoever finished their drink first had to drink that cup.
So there's no deeper meaning?
No, there isn't.
No, it's fine.
With a well of consolation or something.
I don't know whether you brought that in with what the extra cup would say. I was thinking I'm pretty tired and don't really want to go through the graces again. But as soon as you started speaking, I realised just how important they are for this family actually, and I was wondering about all the change that had gone on, certainly for Alistair, through his retirement and how it's coincided with Pat's breakdown. And I guess it was a question about whether some of those spirituality, class, ability, power had been explored.
And I was going to follow up on that actually. It's sort of a similar thing to what James was saying, which we've spoken about slightly. But I know this family investigated, researched open dialogue at considerable length before you went to see them. And this was one of our early families to work with. And I'm just wondering how that impacted on you.
I think for me, I felt that it was really helpful. I felt, in the true spirit of open dialogue is building on the psychological resources of the family, and the fact that they did buy into this and invested so much time researching this made me feel very reassured, really, that there was something they clearly valued. So I felt that with that knowledge there as well, we'd only complement. That was my feeling. I didn't feel, some of your inner voices might be saying, well, they might know more than you, or particularly the dad is a very intelligent man, he may know more than me, maybe he's going to use this against us, but you kind of close that down and know that clearly he's doing this because he wants for his son to get better, and he wants an understanding. That's my interpretation of why he did it. But no, for me, I felt as though it was a positive.
I was just thinking in terms of the graces and how they seem to become more important the more you have a relationship with the family. Because I've seen this clip 3 times and we've talked about the family supervision, and some of the stuff you've come up with I would never think of. And just looking at this clip now, we might have thought of gender and maybe age or ability because of the conversation, but we would have missed so much because we don't have that relationship with them, just how important that is.
I was just going to say, I was mindful of the time and wondered whether it would be a good time to open. Oh, sorry. If you...
I mean, we saw this yesterday, and I didn't say anything about. I said about how effortless it seemed watching this. But then I remember I went back to my room, and what I could remember is a tablecloth, and it's just so bright. And I don't know what it is, but I just kept remembering that. And when I saw it today again, it's like I remembered how I felt yesterday, and something about the tablecloth. And the other thing that I resonated with was what Eddie said about growth. And then what Yasin said again about how initially the father would, do the agenda, and it was quite dominant. And I thought about the growth, all the time that it took to get here, to get to a point where he is now it's sort of, stepping back and letting the son take control. And that made me think about time and the waiting that perhaps we need as clinicians.
So should we open that up to if there's any comments people want to?
I was just thinking about the graces, but also what we've learned in an earlier module about the life cycle transitions, and that seems to be kind of really brought to life here, with all the changes that are going on in the family, and comparing, I don't know, things like age, for instance, or all those things that are kind of intersecting at the moment with those life cycle transitions going on.
I don't know whether this was particularly important or significant, but what really struck me was when he was having a conversation about cheese at the beginning, there was a point where he had a bit of a tic. And at that same time, it kind of brought me back to when we were discussing earlier about Peter's character and the tapping and what we may or may not have done and the risks of that. But Andrew, it looked like at the same, he kind of had this tic, and you went with your hair and you And at that point, it seemed that the two of you were really connected, and then the subject changed to something far more personal to him. So I don't know whether that was something I was aware, but it was there for me.
I was away, you know, you're talking to two men, and now we've got two men there in the team, and whether your inner voices were actually thinking about your transitions, and whether you might share that somehow in a reflection.
Would you? Tell me more.
I think if I had connected with, say, if I was a man and becoming an adult, it had been perhaps a challenging time with my father. I certainly, I might have shared that, yeah. You know, might have said, I'm just thinking about the time when I was, whatever age he is, and you know, it was a challenging time for me too. So I would share that if it felt right, if it felt connected. Because for me, that's been the witness part. Is, you know, you're actually saying, yeah, I can connect to what's going on here. Your experience may be very different. So I'm not trying to say, you know, well, I know exactly how you feel. It's just that there's something there about the experience that I recognise.
Part respond to that. I don't hope helpful. Not much I don't care. Which is that, as you were talking about, I was thinking about love and power and love and respect. And a conversation I was having with James yesterday about, he's a new father, relatively new, and my kids are 19 and 21. And I was thinking, in here, with me and Alice there, generally Pat tends not to address me directly. It tends to be through Paul, who I think he has a very close relationship with. As a kind of a younger male, there's an association there. And Alistair tends to ask me questions, particularly at the end of our therapy, as it were, our session. He'll go out and he'll say to me, "You've heard about Carl Rogers, haven't you?" And what do you think about that? Do you think this kind of, so we have that kind of conversation. But the love and power, the love and respect thing is something to do with, and I think this is one of the transitional things you mentioned, is can the both exist together? That somehow power can often get a bad name for it. And I think what Alistair has shown through his agenda taking, and the family described him as, I don't know, maybe wrong here, terrifying at times. He's got a scary kind of guy. But what he has demonstrated through his behaviour is a really solid love for this son, through the demonstration of his authority and his power with us. And the idea that both go together, and in different ways. I'm not sure when you were asking about that. In my family, they don't. They were exclusive, without a doubt. You know, anybody who had power, you could not love them. It could normally involve violence or something like that. But we were talking about fathers and our children, and being able to have the greatest lesson in those early years is to be able to develop both of those things, to have love and power, and to hold them with respect.
It's been a long day. It was this morning.
I wanted to say something about power and warmth. We had a meeting with Pat once, and what he wanted to explore that day was his admission. And I thought, oh God, here it comes, because I'd offered not to work, which I would have bitterly regretted, with the family, with the team, because I'd been on the 136 suite and I'd been on the restraint teams. And I thought that and everyone said, no, he won't remember, so it'll be fine. And when we got to this meeting, he did remember. And he said, but I remember your warmth. Yeah. But that was a horrible power-laden situation that would have screwed it up.
I don't know what to say. Obviously, I was in the meeting when he said that, and it was the way he said that when it was happening, he just focused on you to talk to him and help him through that. And he remembered that despite being so unwell. Yeah, I'm starting to, so maybe someone
I think that's why this family is so, been such an incredible...
There was a lot of warmth and emotions expressed.
Even about cheese.
That's not sort of reflection of me, that's even from the roughest of situations, from the beginning.
Perhaps Russell's best position to respond to this, but just some thoughts around mindfulness and psychotic episode.
Is Russell waving? We're talking about that tomorrow.
Is Russell waving?
Yeah.
Oh.
Partly.
Did you hear that?
Russell? Russell's gone catatonic.
Say again? Yeah. And psychosis.
The young man was had
And psychosis.
Just say that again. Oh, I'm just getting the question for you.
So the young man with whom we've been working was on a mindfulness retreat for a week and ended up on a retreat thinking about the silent
Silent mindedness.
Called the spiritual awakening.
So Russell, the young man was on a silent retreat for a week with his dad, and he ended up on a roof.
No.
He ended up on a roof. And the question was about the link between mindfulness and psychotic phenomena and becoming psychotic.
In most kind of long-standing retreats, they do have examples of times when people have become psychotic through a prolonged mindfulness retreat. And it's interesting actually because a lot of Buddhist teachers have quite a lot of experience of psychosis as a result. My book is all about that, incidentally, so I can't try to summarise it.
And of course, everyone's read that. You've got to buy the book.
I guess it is something that can happen, but it isn't necessarily wholly pathological, if you want. There are elements of it that relate to what's supposed to happen when people meditate. That's one part of it. The other thing is, in general, people who are vulnerable to becoming psychotic through these experiences tend to not do it. So when I ran a mindfulness group in a VQ ward, for example, people didn't attend if it was too difficult for them, or if it was too heavy for them. So that's why I always attach caveats to mindfulness practice. Do it if it's right for you, if you're ready for it. And if people are pushing themselves too far, it's just like pushing yourself too far with exercise. You can do yourself physical harm, but it can also have some difficulty on the emotional level. So it's something to be careful of if it's turning out to be too much hard work. But by and large, most people don't go into putting themselves into that position where they're taking on too much work. But it does have that possibility. But my own interpretation is I will automatically pathologise it because there's some very real experiences that people are having there as well.
This did become pathologized.
The point was that this did become pathologized. This did become. Yeah, well, presumably because he hit the health services.
Yeah, and that unfortunately is the nature of our service. That when people hit our health service with these kind of symptoms, rather than being heard and explored and expanded on and understood by that person, then being given some credibility, it is pathologized. And I can attest to this more than ever now in the last year, having received emails from dozens of people all around the world. In fact, I got one from Australia just last week who had read my book, which is a way of understanding the psychosis in a non-pathologizing way, and saying, I knew it was explainable and understandable. It isn't something that is just part of a disease and illness, but that is all I was ever told by professionals. So there's another way of looking at it. And actually, tomorrow, I think,
It's almost 5. Do they, so inner circle here, want to comment on the process or generally? No?
The feedback was really...
It's been fantastic.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to say, I'm getting quite emotional now. Hearing all your stories has been fantastic, and how much you've come, how far you've come in a year is amazing. Thank you, everybody. It won't be the first time it was tears, I'm sure. Okay. You've now the groups, yeah, to go into your
So now you're
groups.
on your own for the rest of the evening, but we did kind of talk about it. Well, again, we want to have some kind of celebration on Thursday, but again, we're open for whatever anybody wants to do. It would be nice to be together. So kind of think about it and talk about it, and we'll kind of brainstorm.